looking forward. By the way, thank you, Tammy, for remembering to record that. Sarah, I know you're still getting set up, but what we'll do is welcome to our meeting, and our members of Seroptimist International Phoenix will introduce ourselves to you. So I'll go ahead and start. Henrietta Speedy, former CFO for financial services. Forgot the whole routine here, but now retired and co-president with Lisa of our club. And then moving to my left on the screen is Janine Decker. And Janine, you're on mute.
Janine Decker, former Human Resources Administrator, currently retired, and calling in from Napa, California.
Glad you could join us today, Janine. Mary Greer.
Hi, Mary Greer, retired attorney, currently an aspiring writer.
And
something.
Zoom Master Tammy Zeller.
Yes, I am Tammy Zeller, and I am an underwriting manager at State Farm Insurance and work with all of the new hires across the country. So super excited to hear from you today.
And my co-president, Lisa Farrar.
Hi, I'm Lisa Farrar. I'm co-president with Henrietta Speedy, and I am also very much looking forward to your discussion today, Sarah.
Thank you. And Lori Reed.
Hi, Sarah. I'm Lori Reed. I'm currently retired. I plan to keep it that way.
Peggy Wensman. Peggy, I don't know if you heard me.
Not you, Peggy.
She looks
I think
frozen.
She said her sound
Yeah,
wasn't
looks
working.
frozen. So we'll go over to Lee Wales until Peggy can unfreeze there.
Hello, I'm Lee Wales, formerly executive with Full Information Systems and then a development officer with Valley of the Sun United Way. And a friend of mine was thinking about joining us today. So Tammy, if you see her name, have you got it, Judy? If she decides to join, I don't know if she is. I haven't heard from her.
I haven't seen her yet, but I've let everybody in.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you. And Paula Atkins.
You're on mute, Paula.
Hi, I'm Paula Adkins. I'm currently in Ashburn, Virginia, and happy to join you today.
Thank you. Margie Burke.
Hi, I'm Margie Burke. I am the Chief Finance and Operating Officer at the Desert Botanical Garden. Only a few more days left for Chihuly, and then I am also your Golden West Region Governor-elect for one more month.
Yay.
And Governor.
Not that you're counting.
Not that I'm counting. Everybody's freaking me out, so.
Terry Parker.
Terry Parker, retired City of Phoenix Contracts Administrator. And Shelley, I saw your pictures on Facebook and you look like you were having a good time. I'm sorry to hear you got COVID. But flying out here yesterday, there were 4 other people on the plane who had masks. So I'm figuring.
It's terrible. It's like I followed the rules and someone still gave it to me. So angry.
Well, fingers crossed, Terry, you don't get it too. Tara Jackson.
Tara Jackson, president of Arizona Town Hall. Sarah, wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Joy.
Joy Me, former assistant planning director, City of Phoenix. And I have enjoyed listening to Sarah's interviews on PBS.
Thank you. Judge Susan Bolton.
I'm Susan Bolton. I'm a judge on the United States District Court and particularly interested in this topic, Sarah, because I spent over a decade as the judge assigned to the Gila River adjudication. And then I spent about 15 years as the judge who administered the Gila decree. I have retired from water adjudications, however, but still interested.
Interesting. Thank you. Paula Norby.
Hi, I'm Paula Norby, former educator, currently a small business owner.
And Shelley Cutts.
I'm Shelley Cutts. I'm president-elect of SIP and Unit Chief Counsel for Environmental Enforcement at the Arizona Attorney General's Office. I apologize for my appearance, which is more haggard than normal, but as you may have heard, I took an anniversary trip with my husband, and despite being vaccinated and boosted, came back with COVID. So I am currently isolating at home and actually doing pretty well, other than a bit of a runny nose and a headache. So all things considered, I'm doing fine, but it's quite annoying.
Get well quick, Shelley.
I hope so. Thank you.
Judge Mary Schroeder.
Hi, I'm Mary Schroeder. I'm sitting in my sunlit office at the courthouse. I'm a senior judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and I'm looking forward to this important program.
Thank you. And our upcoming soon to be installed member this month is Joan Burke.
Hi, Joan Burke. Hello, Sarah. I am a telecom lawyer, and I'm wanting to hear Sarah so badly that I'm ignoring the 911 workshop that I'm supposed to be listening to, because I just want to hear Sarah. So if I pop out, it's because I have to listen to one thing, but I plan to be here.
Well, we'll get started, but let me check with Peggy Wentzman and see if she's unfrozen yet, but it doesn't look like it. So hopefully Peggy will be able to get in and join us. All right, then I'll turn it over to our program chair, and that's Shelley Cutts, to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. And hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. Due to the club's interest in wanting to hear about water policy in Arizona and drought and environmental issues generally, I'm delighted, Sarah, that you can be here. Sarah is the director of the Kyle Center at ASU, and she's going to be talking to us today about water policy. So without further ado, I'm going to let Sarah take it away. Thank you so much.
Sarah, you're muted. You're on mute.
Thank you. I am delighted to be with you all, such an impressive group of women, some of whom I feel I go way back with, and I'm happy to get acquainted with those of you I haven't met before. I'm going to go ahead and do the Zoom thing and share a PowerPoint, because I find that talking about water usually goes better if we can look at various graphics and slides. And so what I'd like to do is, I have a sort of format for a presentation I usually give, and today I'm going to try something new, because I think you all are people who pay attention to the news and are somewhat more informed than lots of groups I encounter. And so I'm going to trust that you have the Colorado River on your mind. So I'd like to hit the two big water challenges that we face in the state first, and then we can move on to other issues as we have time for. And certainly what I'd most like to do is have a conversation with you all, hear about your concerns and your ideas. But I'll start with talking about my organization, the Kyle Center for Water Policy, which is part of Morrison Institute for Public Policy at ASU. Morrison just celebrated its 40th anniversary of providing nonpartisan research and analysis on critical policy issues for Arizona. And the Kyle Center is basically the branch of Morrison Institute that does the work on water issues in Arizona. And since water really knows no boundaries, we say water issues in Arizona and the West. The Kyle Center was launched at the end of 2014. I am the first and only ever director. And so since our launch, we've done a lot of what you would expect a water policy center to do, which is produce a lot of reports covering a wide range of topics, from the Colorado River and the role of tribes in the recent negotiations, several publications related to the adjudications. Judge Bolton, I am a huge admirer of your jurisprudence on surface water adjudications. So it's kind of thrilling to have you here and also intimidating. And we've looked closely at some of the water issues that we particularly face within the central Arizona, where about 85% of Arizonans live, as well as a recent paper on how community water systems can be sure to provide equitable water to everyone, regardless of ability to pay. But our most exciting, I would say, project to date is our Arizona Water Blueprint. There's a website here, azwaterblueprint.asu.edu. Please don't go to it yet, but I hope you will have a chance to go see the blueprint. We just won an Arizona Forward Award in Environmental Education, a Crescordia Award, so we're really proud to get that recognition. The cornerstone of the blueprint is an interactive map that brings together almost 60 different layers, which are enriched with all kinds of data about water policy and water resources. But we also have some guided tours of water policy issues. For example, a groundwater level change app that you can see here, which allows you to see what's going on in different basins throughout the state, and explainers on water policy issues. So we're trying to build it up as a big resource that people who care about these issues can go to find out what's happening with water policy. I'll just remind you all that Arizona is a water scarce state. This is a map that shows that any area that gets under about 18 to 20 inches of rain per year or precipitation per year is considered semi-arid to arid. And so, of course, you know that almost all of Arizona is semi-arid to arid. And so that means that we always are working as a state on ensuring sufficient water supplies for all the things, all the economic activities, all the recreational activities, all the environmental interests, all the things that we care about. So, and one other important thing to keep in mind, and I find that a lot of people aren't aware of this, and that is that as a state, Arizona has a fairly diverse water portfolio. We have Colorado River water. Of course, the Colorado River defines the state's western border, and we import a huge amount of Arizona's allocation of Colorado River water via the Central Arizona Project Canal, which starts at Lake Havasu and moves over 330 miles in its course to deliver water from Phoenix down to Tucson. We also have in-state rivers as a water supply, and the biggest in-state river system is SRP, the SRP supply. And we have groundwater, currently the single biggest source of water in Arizona. In an arid place or semi-arid place like Arizona, we think of groundwater as a non-renewable resource because we have a tendency to withdraw it much faster than aquifers are recharged. So when we're thinking about water supply and these different sources of the portfolio, it's critically important to keep in mind that groundwater is a non-renewable resource, whereas surface water, while there are great variations in the amount of supply available from year to year, we can pretty reliably count on having some surface water every year. And when combined with different types of storage, we can manage surface water as more or less a renewable supply of water. And then finally, there's a piece on this pie chart for reclaimed water. Reclaimed water is, of course, water that has entered the water treatment, the sanitary treatment system, and then is reused. These percentages come from the Department of Water Resources, who have a kind of odd way of accounting for reclaimed water, and I think it kind of undervalues how big a role reclaimed water has in the state of Arizona, especially in the larger cities. We're reusing almost all of the water that enters the wastewater treatment system, something like 93% of the water that enters the wastewater treatment system currently. Just a quick look at the two big cities, Greater Phoenix and Greater Tucson's water sources. This is Greater Phoenix. Of course, the SRP system is a big source of water for the area. So there's a bigger piece of pie for in-state rivers and a comparatively smaller reliance on Colorado River water and groundwater. And then for Tucson, there is a much larger reliance on Colorado River water because Tucson doesn't have a big in-state surface water system like the Salt Verde system that SRP manages. I think the total demand currently, I have total demand on my Tucson slide. I think the total demand for Greater Phoenix's water, this would be for the whole valley, is around 2.25 million acre feet. And the total demand for Tucson is comparatively smaller at about 305,000 acre feet per year. So, and I could mention here, I have it more down later in the presentation, that an acre foot of water, one way of thinking about an acre foot of water is that an acre foot will supply 4 efficient single residential homes per year with water. And that's a nice rule of thumb for thinking about water supplies. You just multiply an acre foot by 4, and then you know how many homes per year you have that could be served with that amount of water. So unless there are questions about the information I've just covered, and feel free to speak up, to unmute and speak up and just interrupt me if you like. I can try to monitor the chat, but it's a little difficult. But unless there are questions, I'll go ahead and talk about what's going on with the Colorado River. All right, I don't see any questions so far. So I expect that you all have read that we are we're actually in a somewhat precarious situation with the Colorado River. I'll talk for a moment about the reasons why, and then I'll talk about what this means for us. So why is the Colorado River in trouble? Well, for a long time, we've known that Lake Mead, which is one of 2 massive reservoirs on the Colorado, and there are more than 2, but there are 2 really big reservoirs for impounding water to be used by the lower basin states. There are 7 states that share Colorado River water and Mexico. So that's Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, California, and Arizona, and the country of Mexico. We all share Colorado River water. And these 2 reservoirs that hold the water for the lower basin, which comprises California, Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico, are seeing declining levels. One of the big reasons for the declining levels in the lower reservoir, Lake Mead, which y'all know is near Las Vegas, is that there were some accounting errors or deliberate oversights when the system was first implemented, when the guidelines were first created. And so one of those oversights was to not include evaporation in the amount of water that would be leaving Lake Mead every year. And the other oversight is to not include evaporation and system losses, and system losses being represented in the outflow line on this slide. And so that means that in the way that the big system accounting occurs by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the agency that manages Lake Mead, the lake itself would be losing more than 1 million acre feet per year, even if we were having normal amounts of snowpack. Of course, it's snowpack in the upper Rockies that supply Lake Mead and the reservoir upstream, Lake Powell, which is by Page, Arizona. So that's one big problem, the structural deficit. But another problem that is appearing to be more and more, I would say, intransigent and severe is mega drought and climate change. So this is an interesting graphic or pair of graphics from Connie Woodhouse, University of Arizona hydrologist, that's basically comparing 2 different seasons of precipitation as represented in the blue lines and temperature as represented in the brown lines. And her conclusion in a report that was recently published is that the Colorado Basin is in the worst drought in 1,200 years. This is a mega drought that humans, that modern humans have not experienced. You have to look to tree ring records to see droughts like this, of this kind of persistence. There is a lot of reason to think that we are now in the hotter, drier future that we've been warned about, and that this isn't a mega drought that's going to, that's going to end soon and result in the reservoirs refilling, but instead that we need to change our expectations regarding the amount of water that the Colorado River can actually produce. This is another interesting graphic showing the 10-year average flow at a stream gauge up above Lake Powell. And basically, you can see with the darker blue line that there seems to be a pretty strong trend downward from 1920 to 2020. So, of course, I mentioned before that Central Arizona has historically been entitled to and relied on between 1.5 and 1.6 million acre feet of water per year. So in the little map that you see on this slide, you can see the service area of the Central Arizona Project, which is the canal and the agency that delivers the Colorado River water to its service area, the 3-county service area. And and of course, not everyone who lives in this service area relies only on CAP water. We have groundwater and SRP water and reclaimed water too. But it is a super important water supply for this area, which includes about 85% of the population of Arizona. And when Arizona needed to convince California to agree to finance the CAP way back, the California delegation said, we will vote in favor of the federal financing for the CAP as long as you, Arizona, agree that CAP contract holders will have junior priority on in the Colorado River or lower basin system. This for California was important because it cleared up a question of how would a drought be handled between Arizona and California, Nevada and Mexico. And Arizona didn't have much choice, we agreed. And this means that in a time of shortage, Central Arizona bears the brunt of the cuts. So we have to hurt the most if there's not enough water to meet the allocations of everyone in the lower basin. So none of what I'm telling you is news. We've been aware of this problem for 20 years or so. In 2007, you can see in some of the columns, there's a bracketed 2007. The lower basin agreed to take certain cuts if Lake Mead's level fell to certain places. And so we operated under the 2007, these new 2007 guidelines for a few years, and then realized that that wouldn't do it. That wouldn't be enough. We hadn't even experienced the cut yet, but all the water managers in the lower basin could see that the lake's levels were still declining. And so in 2019, the lower basin states entered a new agreement called the Drought Contingency Plan, or DCP. And under this agreement, Arizona agreed to take bigger cuts, and so did all the other lower basin water users. And another important part of the Drought Contingency Plan, or DCP, is that we agreed on some rules for enabling water users to conserve water in Lake Mead and potentially remove that water later. Before the DCP, typically on a surface water system, you have a kind of use it or lose it rule. You can't leave your water in a reservoir and take it out in a future year. It's just left. It doesn't have your name on it. The DCP enables water users to basically reserve water in Lake Mead, and under certain conditions, they are able to take it out in future years. So that's another important part of trying to keep the lake levels up. It has been somewhat successful. It has staved off the decline of levels in Lake Mead to some degree, but it hasn't. Before I get to that, I'll talk about who's impacted, but it hasn't been sufficient. So who's impacted by the cuts that we just talked about? Well, this is a wonderful graphic. I know so many people who say this is a very confusing chart. To me, it's as clear as crystal. This is a chart that shows the priorities of CAP water users, and the highest priority is on the bottom and the lowest priority is on the top, because like a bucket or a glass of water, the top it empties from the top, right? So essentially, the cuts that we're looking at under the DCP first hit a pool that mostly impacts farmers in Pinal County or irrigation districts in Pinal County. That would be the ag pool. And then the next pool down is called the non-Indian ag priority pool, or NIA priority pool. And that's it's a kind of unofficially allocated grab bag of different water users. And then most importantly, we have two high priority user groups. The Indian priority group, which is comprised of tribes who have through settlements allocations of CAP water, and then the M&I priority group, which is comprised of cities. And it's cities that were around in the early 70s when CAP supplies were being allocated. And so what this chart means is, well, we're in our first year of cut, and this 2022 is our first year of shortage. And so the Pinal County irrigation districts that serve farmers in Pinal County have basically experienced the first cut in Colorado River supplies. Under the in-state agreement that allowed Arizona to reach DCP, there has been a plan for some mitigation where other water supplies are delivered to the users that are cut, and compensation. And the biggest form of compensation to those farmers in Pinal County has been funding to develop new groundwater infrastructure so that they can use groundwater to replace their CAP supplies. Next year, we will almost definitely get into a tier 2A shortage, which means that there will be cuts to the NIA users. And it wouldn't be surprising to me that in 2024, we would get into a tier 3 shortage, where we would see a cut to these high priority users, the Indian priority and the municipal and industrial priority. So that's really what we're looking at with the Colorado River. And then to sort of make things a little worse, there was a provision triggered last August that said if there's a high likelihood of Lake Mead plummeting down to a low level, to the elevation 1030, then the lower basin states needed to figure out something more to do to help keep Lake Mead's levels up. And that provision was triggered. And so the various agencies got together and came up very quickly, in a kind of miraculously short time. They came up with a new plan to pay water users to leave another 500,000 acre feet of water in the reservoir. That plan has had mixed success. The last time I checked, only about half, they were only able to get about half the amount of water planned left in Lake Mead. And then in the meantime, the last set of projections looked a little worse than the most recent. So that's really what we're looking at with Lake Mead. We're looking at declines. If we go back to that chart, I can talk a little bit about what this is going to mean for people in the Phoenix area and Tucson area specifically. I guess before I go to that, I'll go to this slide and say that on the Arizona Water Blueprint is a really, I think, very helpful explainer about the Colorado River shortage. So given the limited time today, if you get interested in finding out more about what the shortage means, I encourage you to go check that explainer. Let me say that if we just go back to thinking about Colorado River cuts and what they're going to mean for Arizona. We'll start with Pinal agriculture. It's regrettable to have agriculture turn to groundwater. The CAP was originally conceived as it was called a rescue plan for Arizona, because Arizona was growing in reliance on groundwater, and its major industry was agriculture. And we were overdrafting 2.5 million acre feet per year of groundwater, year after year after year. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the groundwater overdraft problem was accelerating. And the CAP, bringing in this massive supply of water from the Colorado River, seemed like the only thing we could do, the rescue plan. To then turn back to the old groundwater for agriculture is regrettable. I mean, the farmers there don't have much other choice, but it means that water supply won't be there for a future use. It's going to be used up in the primarily cotton and alfalfa that's being grown there, and it won't be available as a backup supply or as a supply for some other use in the future. And that also means that as parts of Pinal County look to more urban development, they will have extra challenges trying to find water to support that development. So that's what we're feeling this year as we move into a higher level shortage, and the NIA pool begins to experience significant cuts. We'll find that probably the tribes will be impacted, and this is mostly the Gila River Indian community, the Tohono O'odham community, and the Salt River Pima Maricopa, Ak-Chin, the communities that are closer to Phoenix and Tucson. I haven't named them all. Others have a CAP supply. But what those tribes have done, for the most part, while they use some of their water, especially the Gila, SRP, MIC, TO, they also lease some of their water to cities. And so the loss of NIA water that's allocated to these various groups will probably have the impact on tribes of loss of revenue, and it'll have the impact on some cities of a loss of a water supply that they have been using and counting on. And then finally, in the case of the highest priority CAP supplies, I'm ignoring the little red band on the bottom of this chart, Indian and, the priority 3. In the case of the Indian and M&I priority users, again, much of that water, the high priority Indian water, a good deal of it is leased to cities. And so cuts for that pool may very well translate into cuts in the water supply that cities have been depending on. And cuts in the M&I priority pool will have a very direct impact in terms of water supply available to cities. So I expect that in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be seeing cities really ramp up their messaging and programs to encourage people to reduce the amount of water they use. And I think there's a lot of capacity by people especially in the Phoenix area. I say this as a Phoenix native, to reduce the amount of water that's being used. That's really the Colorado River. This would be a good time to see if you have any questions about what's going on with the Colorado River. Yes.
I have a question. I noticed that you didn't mention mining. How much of an impact does mining, what's your concern with the mining industry?
Yeah. Well, there are a few mining companies that have Colorado River entitlements, if that's the question. Will they be impacted by Colorado River shortages? Yes, but they have an easier time, probably, arguably, than other industries to acquire alternate supplies. They have the ability to store up water for, to sort of, they know how much they need. They generally have an idea of the life of the mine. So it's not the same as a city, which needs water theoretically in perpetuity. A mine has a life of 20, 30, 40 years. They know how much water they need, and they have lots of options for acquiring the water for their supplies. So as far as Colorado River impacts, it's an expense, you know, a cost. I don't think it will be as disruptive for mining as it could be, certainly as it is for agriculture that relies on CAP. I see Mary has a hand up.
Sarah, how does Lake Powell factor into the Colorado River situation? Who's entitled to it? And it seems to me, I've read that it may be basically shut down. So I'm just interested to know what's happening there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Lake Powell is basically, it's part of the two reservoir system that's managed, you know, these two reservoirs, Meade and Powell, are managed conjunctively to store water for the lower basin. So the Lake Powell users are the same as the Lake Meade users. And then we just have the Grand Canyon in between. And you're right, Lake Powell is approaching a level below which it can't produce hydropower anymore. So that's a trigger point that has actually, remember I mentioned the trigger point for the lower basin that led to the 500+ plan. When it reached 35 feet above this no power production level, 3490, that triggered a requirement that the upper basin states look for measures to help elevate lake levels in Lake Powell. And those measures are basically use less water so that less water will enter the system. Both of the reservoirs are hydropower, important for hydropower production. And so hitting that point where there won't be hydropower production is problematic. There is a sort of surprising deficit of research on the actual impacts of Powell not producing hydropower. I've only found one report by an NGO, and it's not even published. But the conclusions of that report were that the impacts of non-production of power for Powell would be mostly felt by rural areas and tribes, not so much. Most of the big energy, utilities have turned to other energy sources and looked at grid, resilience to make sure that, this thing that they can see coming doesn't have the kinds of impacts that they're worried about. But if both Powell and Meade were not producing power, there's no question that would have very significant impacts. Apart from that, there's a concern with each of the reservoirs that they could get down to a level at dead pool. And dead pool means there's still water in the reservoir, but you can't get water out of the reservoir. So the reservoir or dead pool for Meade is 890. We're in the 1,000 something now. There's a concern for both Powell and Meade that if we don't have some good snowpack and we don't have some bigger conservation measures to keep lake levels up, we could hit dead pool in one or the other of the reservoirs. And that's kind of the existential concern that water managers are dealing with now. I could, unfortunately, I'm like, you press a button and I can go on and on, but when I think of the Colorado River in Arizona, in terms of the threats for Arizona, I think of dead pool as something that is probably a temporary problem, a terrible temporary problem, and most terrible for the main stem communities that absolutely depend on a flowing river. And that's all the way, from Bullhead City down to Yuma, and Yuma as an agricultural center is really important for the whole country. It produces lettuce and winter vegetables that the whole country relies on. So that's how I think of dead pool. That's not a forever thing, that's a temporary thing, but it would be really bad. The longer term issue that is hard to deal with is adjusting to greatly reduced flows as part of our ongoing expectations for the Colorado system. I see that Judge Bolton has a hand up.
I do. Thank you, Sarah. Are any of the municipalities that rely on the CAP taking any aggressive water conservation efforts?
Yes, and aggressive is sort of in the eye of the beholder, but let's just say that for some time, cities in the CAP service area have foreseen the possibility of a cut, of shortage. And so they've been taking a lot of measures to prepare for it. One of the biggest things that they've been doing is storing groundwater. So in a longer presentation, I would have talked about Arizona's vaunted Groundwater Management Act, which applies to the CAP service territory as well as to Prescott and then the Santa Cruz Basin. And the Groundwater Management Act is basically a high regulation scheme for the use of groundwater in the areas that are subject to this regulation, which are called active management areas, or AMAs. And so one of the things that's great about the Groundwater Management Act is that cities or other water providers can store water in the ground and accrue credits. And there's an orderly accounting system for groundwater use and groundwater storage managed by the State Department of Water Resources. So seeing this coming, water users in central Arizona have banked millions of acre feet of water. At the last check, it was about 13 million acre feet of water. So that's one very important step. Cities like Phoenix and Tucson have worked hard to make sure that if there's a shortage of Colorado River water, they can turn to groundwater or other water sources at a minimum as a bridge. And they have years and years, really decades worth of water stored that they can fall back on. The other thing that cities have done really well is they've ramped up their water reuse. So one of the things that they're storing that's part of reuse is that reclaimed water. They're accruing groundwater storage credits by taking treated water and putting it in the ground for a future use. And some cities, I would say Scottsdale is at the forefront, are looking at even moving to direct potable reuse so that they take their treated effluent that's Class A effluent, and then they deliver it to a potable drinking water treatment facility. So those are things that they've done that are kind of long-term projects that are designed to provide a greater degree of resilience in the future. And now what we'll see is cities asking us to use less. We've lived with, Wayne Drop, the big water drop, water, use it wisely. We've been living with messages like this for a long time, but I don't think we felt a lot of pressure under those messages. We just knew it was good to use less. It's good. Pat ourselves on the back when we use less. Now we're going to see more aggressive campaigns by cities to push reduced water use. So Mary, you have your hand up again. And I guess I'll stop sharing for now, and then we can go back to a share if I need to show you guys a graph or something. Okay.
So my question relates to the groundwater banking and the extent to which it's actually been proven to work. My understanding is that groundwater, that there's a lot of uncertainty about the hydrology and geologic conditions where groundwater is pumped into the ground. It can migrate. It doesn't remain in place necessarily where you put it, and it may not be retrievable to the same extent that it's been pumped in. And we have this ability of people to put a straw in the ground and pump out groundwater without regulation in a lot of places. And so I'm just wondering whether it's giving us a false sense of security about future reserves to have this groundwater banking program that has not really been tested out.
Yeah, I often hear that critique of groundwater hydrology, and I'm a lawyer, not a hydrologist, but I I ask this a lot. I ask hydrologists for cities, hydrologists for the Department of Water Resources, and then hydrologist consultants. And they all say that they're not really, they don't agree that we don't have a good handle on the groundwater that we're banking. You can look to an agency like the Salt River Project, that, which is, they're really, the SRP water that is delivered is a mix of water, that's surface water from the Salt and the Verde, and groundwater. And you can see, that they have a really good handle on groundwater, the balance of groundwater and surface water hydrology as they deliver it. Similarly, the Department of Water Resources has been using the latest and greatest water modeling, and they, hydrologists there have a high degree of confidence in their assessment of how much groundwater is in the aquifers. The aquifers that have high migration aren't the places, or the places that have that high movement of water, like I think it's transpassivity is the term, anyway, are not the places that are being used for recharge. The recharge sites have almost, or this is what I hear, we don't have many sites left where we can do groundwater recharge, because as you say, Mary, it doesn't necessarily just sit there in the ground. You have to choose a site where there's the hydrology to give you confidence that water will stay in the ground. So we are at a point where in both the Phoenix AMA and the Tucson AMA, we don't have a lot of additional options for banking more water, but that seems like kind of a moot problem because we don't have water to bank in the way we did before. As far as straws in the ground, I appreciate the opportunity to highlight a publication that we put out there a couple of years ago called The Myth of Safe Yield, where we talked about how the exceptions to the Groundwater Management Act, in other words, grandfathered wells or special other kinds of wells, industrial wells that get to drill under an exceptional permit, are frustrating the AMAs getting to safe yield, especially the Phoenix AMA. And I'd love to come back and talk about groundwater within the active management areas at some point. But I would say in the big picture, while the Phoenix AMA is going to be extra challenged to get to safe yield, and the Tucson AMA got to safe yield but isn't expected to stay there, for the most part, the cities have their confidence in their groundwater supplies is probably pretty well placed. They probably can recover all of the water that they hope to recover. Sarah, your hand is up.
Thanks, Sarah. Great information. So, last year, I think Arizona had the fastest growth in population of any state. There's lots of tech companies moving here that use a lot of water to the Valley area. And obviously there's this kind of push-pull with economic development. If you talk about the water shortages or issues, then there's a concern you'll dry up economic development. I'm just curious, given what you know about where you see the water shortages or not, what communities in Arizona or cities or expansions do you think are at greatest risk of suddenly not having water for that development?
Yeah, so the cities that are at greatest risk would be cities, not having water for their development that they aspire to, or not having water for the people they already have there. Which are you asking, both or the first one, I guess?
That's a very good distinction. I think that perhaps both. For those that suddenly realize they don't have water, which may come as a shock, but also my understanding is that there's a lot of developments that have been approved, and with the 100-year water certification, where in reality I wonder how secure are those really? Is that really guaranteed?
Right. So within the active management areas, there can't be, and a few other places in Arizona that have opted in, there can't be a new subdivision, which means 6 or more homes, without first proving to the Department of Water Resources 100-year supply of water that's physically, financially, and legally available. And that's a really rigorous standard that Tara was referring to, which helps ensure that growth doesn't happen without water. And other parts of the Groundwater Management Act and the related regulations really push that supply to be on renewable supplies. And there's this weird workaround that we published a report about that we probably won't get into here, but essentially the way to think of it is you need 100 years of renewable supplies to build a new subdivision. In some cases, those supplies can be groundwater as long as the subdivision enrolls in a program where CAP has to go find water to replenish the groundwater that's being used. And that's where in Arizona, the Department of Water Resources, which is in charge of this whole program, has said essentially all of the groundwater in Pinal County has been allocated. So there are lots of subdivisions yet to be built, but the developers for those subdivisions have already gone into the department and proved their 100-year water supply and got their certificate of assured water supply. So the Department of Water Resources has said no more, there can't be more development in Pinal County unless you, the developer, come up with a new supply of water for that development. I expect, maybe not everyone does, that that announcement could be made for the western part of the Phoenix AMA. There's a lot of development under this program for used groundwater with with this enrollment in a program that obligates CAP to go out and find the water to replenish the groundwater, and we're now awaiting new modeling by the department that may well result in that kind of announcement. So I'm not so worried that those developments with the certificate will actually run out of water. They have groundwater supplies for 100 years. I do have a worry that the water to replenish the supplies they're using up will be very hard to find in the future as we have more and more water challenges. I think it's the places that might arguably have the biggest challenges, and a worry for me, is that we have communities that aspire to very big growth. A place like Buckeye talks about being 600, 800,000, a million people. And we don't know where the water would come from for that growth. There are lots of places in the greater Phoenix area and Tucson area, Pinal County, that talk big, have big plans for big growth, but they haven't figured out where they're going to get the water for that growth. As long as we have the assured water supply requirement, then and it's rigorously enforced, maybe even more rigorously than currently, then we don't have to worry that there won't be water or that people could get stuck. We could worry, that this could impact the speed of growth. But maybe for me a bigger worry would be that the couple that bought a property would wind up realizing all they had was a dirt lot and no water. That we have protections against that thanks to the Groundwater Management Act. Joy, your hand is up.
Yes, I have two concerns. One is about the areas that are not in active management where people are pumping, and the big industrial pumpers can afford to go very deep and leave the people with more shallow wells dry and eventually with no ability to have water. I'm concerned about that, and the fact that the legislature doesn't seem to want to deal with this issue at all. A few people are able to block legislation, and there doesn't seem to be any long-term thinking that this could be a serious problem for particularly the non-active management areas.
Yeah, you just articulated the problem extremely well. In most rural areas of Arizona, there is no regulation of groundwater. We have a few little exceptional places where when we passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980, there was a prohibition on new irrigated agriculture in 3 areas, little areas of the state. But the rest of the state outside of the AMAs and those irrigation non-expansion areas have no regulation of groundwater. If you own a piece of property, you can drill a well and use all the water that you can get out of that well as long as you're not wasting it. The concern has arisen because of new big water users, mostly in the form of industrial agriculture. A lot of people want to talk about the Saudi company that's growing alfalfa in La Paz County so that they can send it back to Saudi Arabia for their dairy industry. But there's a Minnesota dairy that moved into Cochise County and is probably, actually having more dramatic impacts on local well owners than the La Paz County operation. So it's not a matter of foreign versus US. It's really a failure of regulation or of consumer protection that in Arizona, to me, and this is my opinion, but I don't think it's a good situation that people can come along and invest in a piece of land and be so vulnerable to having their well run dry. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to dig a well, and there's no point in even spending all that money to dig a well if it can run dry. And it's a real problem in the state that there is a kind of political, impasse that legislative proposals to address this haven't been able to get a hearing. So definitely, for me, mostly an issue of protection of people who invest, their life savings in a property and then suddenly discover they're out of water.
I'd like to ask about the Colorado River Indian Reservation.
Looks like we have about 1 minute left. Is there anything else I should cover?
The water or the likelihood.
Henrietta, I see your hand is up.
I'm really concerned about that, the alfalfa, the use of excessive water. Is there nothing we can do? They can actually get the groundwater till it's totally dry? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, they can. And that's, in the way to think about that is that they're looking at the water the way you look at a mine, like an ore body. And they're thinking we can use all this water to grow a crop and sell, sell the crop or use the crop essentially for an economic activity. And the absence of regulation enables them to take that view of those water supplies. So some of those water supplies took, millennia to fill those aquifers. I mean, it's called fossil groundwater. So yeah, it's a very difficult situation for those rural areas. And I want to add that those rural areas have a much harder time bringing in another water supply than a place, like Phoenix, where you have a big consumer base to spread the costs of new infrastructure over. So looks like Lori has a hand up, and I understand that people have to leave. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. It's really, I knew you all would have really good questions, and it's been a pleasure.
My question, Tara kind of touched on this when she was talking about industrial, the industrial use of water. And my question is about these big data centers that are moving into Arizona. And are they being regulated in the water because they use a lot of water?
Yeah, it's a mix. In some cases, like in Mesa, where those data centers, and you're right, they use a lot of water, and more importantly, they use a lot of water and they don't provide a lot of jobs, and the jobs they do provide tend to be fairly low paying. In contrast with a semiconductor plant, which uses a lot of water and provides high paying jobs and a lot of high paying jobs, and much of their water, 80% of the water typically can be reclaimed or recycled. So, it's fun to compare a little bit. In some places like Mesa, the data centers are using part of the water of the portfolio of that city. And then in some instances, they may be able to get one of those exceptional industrial withdrawal permits and use groundwater that isn't subject to the limitations of the Groundwater Management Act. So basically they're dipping into what you might think of as the region's shared groundwater deep savings. And so I think it's good for us to think about who's using the groundwater, because we only have that one supply, very hard to recharge. So I knew you all would zero in on the big issues, and I so appreciate it. We didn't have to talk about turning the water off when we're brushing our teeth or some of those other topics. So thank you so much.
Sarah Porter, we're so glad that you joined us today. Really terrific information. And before we turn it back over to Shelley Cutts, our program chair, we're really glad that you said that you would be glad to come back and speak to us again. And we would love to have you come back and let us know if there's any progress or not in this area.
Okay, well, thank you. It would be my pleasure. And I hope in the meantime, you all check out the Arizona Water Blueprint. I'll send Shelley a link and some suggestions about what to go check out on that website.
Thank you. And Shelley, to you.
No, great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for speaking with us. And we look forward to having you back maybe next club year for a follow-up on what's happened since. But we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and keeping us better informed. So thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.